Hi everyone, this is Stephanie. I'm having some major technical difficulties tonight, and also some lack of confidence that I can bring something compelling to the table because you all have very wonderful and articulate thoughts. So I'm gonna do my best. And I'm also gonna try not to be long-winded because my first video was 10 minutes. So I'm inspired to re-record and send something that's more concise. So I wanted to talk about a couple of things from Unmarriages, Ruth Mazo-Karis's book that we have been reading this week about marriages and unions in the medieval period. There's a couple of points that she makes that I think are intriguing and that also I think stand as her main arguments. The first one is on page 1. She says, only by historicizing marriage can we see the inherent illogic of claims that there's only one real form. I find that very compelling, as well as one of her last quotes on page 213. I'm sorry that I'm holding my phone. I know that's probably not great recording etiquette, but I have been trying and failing all night at this video, so this is my last ditch effort. So on page 209, I also like that she says, a variety of unions other than marriages existed at various points in the Middle Ages because there were some benefits to one or both parties. And her final statement on page 213 says, we should not let ritual similarity obscure the multiple alternatives available to medieval people and their difference from those available today. So I think she definitely has lots of different points within that, and she talks about what marriage is or unions are. I think she does an interesting job also on page 8 talking about her attempts at what to call these unions. She says she refers to them as quasi-marital unions, domestic partnerships, concubinage, heterosexual unions, opposite sex, and then also same-sex unions. She talks about pairing and coupling and marital affection, and I just think the terminology that she uses is interesting because I think it subtly changes what you're talking about, obviously, when you change the words even slightly. So I thought that was pretty interesting, just looking at language. And one thing I found interesting too is early on when she's talking about Abraham and polygamy. I find even that concept of polygamy to be really interesting because when we tend to think of polygamy, we associate it with some type of union or marriage, right? But then also I thought it was interesting to think about the idea of sexual polygamy. So on page 12, she says, Abraham was often understood in the Middle Ages as having been a polygamist, that is, having more than one wife, not just more than one sexual partner. And I had never considered having multiple sexual partners as polygamy, and I don't know that's what she's implying, but I thought it was an interesting, again, kind of difference in language and how language changes or can change the meaning of things, or just even if you shift your perspective a little bit, how you can look at something different, which is also something I did as I was reading through this. I had multiple notes, and also Danielle mentioned this in her post from earlier, that things are just so much more complex than you might expect, right? Like at face value, at least, I mean, I'm sure you guys have been in an upper level academic setting for a long time. This is my first class that I'm taking. So it's kind of interesting to start questioning the way I see things. But the institution of marriage or unions was always very like static and unchanging for me. And then looking at just how complex these unions historically have been, and especially how much of the burden tends to fall on the woman, I thought that was really interesting. That was something that Licia, I don't know if I'm saying that right, Licia, she just posted about the book also being like a stance on not a stance, but an argument on gender. And I thought that was interesting because I think women's role in all of this is incredibly complex. And as Karis said, the lower income and social status of the woman, kind of the less say and less stake she had in making her own decisions. I think Heloise is an interesting example to kind of counter that. So that was something I found her story pretty interesting. Ingeborg's story I thought was also interesting in that it didn't follow that traditional path of, kind of, pardon me, kind of being a traditional path of like lower income women having to kind of just do what they're told to, or what their family has them do, or what the church has them do. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And the last thing I want to say, because I'm over time, but at least it's not a 10-minute video like my first video was, is that I also really questioned the idea of marriage versus love versus like sexual partnership. And I think it's really fascinating, and again, especially because I haven't considered this before, how those by no means are intertwined, right? I think at least I do, and I'm sure lots of other people do, tend to have that kind of romanticized notion that throughout history, these marriages are, you have like the romanticized novels and movies and things like that about people marrying for love, and really that's commonly not the case, right? According to Karas. I do think it was a difficult book to read. One of my colleagues picked it up and she said, "Oh, I'm gonna put this on my Christmas wish list." But she's a lit major, and so she loves reading. But I have been finding that reading obviously informative texts is much more difficult than reading novels or any other kind of textbooks I've ever read. So I definitely don't think I could give this to my students. I think giving clips of it to students would be kind of cool to analyze and kind of look at the primary sources. But other than that, I enjoyed the book. I think it was really fascinating and gave me a really new perspective on what to think. So I will talk to you guys soon. Bye.